tell us a little bit about conscious cities, the origin of it, um, and again, take it back to that really important concept of these spaces really can impact our behavior and how we're feeling, and that can impact what we accomplish, how we show up in the workplace or, on the sidewalk, road rage. We could write a lot of different examples.
To tie it to what we just spoke about and this kind of comment that you came back to, which is that we're not very good at negotiating our lives with others. I think when I speak about making the invisible visible, it's about creating language. It's about creating the lexicon for us to be able to negotiate our lives together. Because when you can speak about specific performance measures, when you can agree on them, when you can measure them, when you can get feedback, when you can debate around the meaning of them, then a language creates the lexicon needed. And I think we're just not there yet. So I would say that I think most of us would have the intention to live well with others and our neighbors. I think we have a very poor tool set to do it, both on a governance level, on a cultural level, and on a linguistic level as well.
Hmm.
Um, and I think all of these kind of barriers that we have are really part of the reason why we get ourselves into shit all the time as a species. Really, there's a real lack of foresight in the way that we function. And it's a big philosophical question to say, why is it that we have such lack of foresight? You could say it's because of the short time span that we live in, and we might actually just care about that time span, and we don't actually care about what's going to happen in the future. There's enough indications to show that might be one of the reasons. But this lack of foresight, for all these reasons of a lack of lexicon or of a lack of type of governance or lack of culture in this way, is really one of the reasons conscious cities were set up. Because I'll kind of in a nutshell say how the way that you can think about conscious cities and then what it means for the future. To me, as I saw it, a city is an accumulation of all the conscious decisions that were made that created it. That means that all cities or all environments are really a manifestation of intent. And that intent really begins in our consciousness. And therefore, all cities and all environments are the result of consciousness in some ways. And cities, especially because of their complexity, are really this constantly changing reflection of our collective consciousness, because really they are the cementing of the decisions that are made, right? Why do people not land more? And part of it is kind of encapsulated in a lot of what we've spoken about in this conversation, which is making the invisible visible and not having the lexicon and the language available to us. And a lot of it is to do with agency. How much agency do we have to change our environments? And how did we develop these systems that take away agency from us? I think there is a relationship between awareness and demand for agency. And there we might explain why there's a lag, right? So society becomes aware of something. That awareness then changes the way people make decisions and the way they prioritize things. And those changes lead to demand for agency and demand for change.
You talked about looking at food as one example, that over time we've changed what type of numbers we're looking at, and that has just the disclosure of calories, ingredients, et cetera, has really started to change the collective consciousness around food. we're obviously seeing it. I live part of the time in New York City. We're seeing it a lot with building scores around sustainability and energy efficiency. But I also imagine that at some point there'll be a healthy building score. What impact does this building have on your health? But you- maybe if you could give us those examples, and talk through the evolution and how you see this playing out over the next decade or 2 decades with the again intersection of human performance and architecture design in the built environment.
Okay. I will start with the boring version of talking about this analogy of nutritional value and so on. And then we'll get into the nuance of it, because the nuance is kind of more interesting. Oh, the boring version is we put labels on our food that show nutritional content, and that has changed the way we consume food,
Mm,
right? There's this kind of like assumed causality. The reality of it is that it's it's a much slower process than what this causality suggests, because I don't need to tell you. Maybe I have a worse sweet tooth than others, but the fact that something has a label on it that it's terrible for your health doesn't always stop me buying, right? We're not necessarily very rational beings. Daniel Kahneman got a Nobel Prize just proving that. And before Daniel Kahneman, David Hume, a Scottish philosopher, more than 100 years before him, also spoke about the fact that we are driven by our emotions and not necessarily by rationale, and therefore we need to understand ourselves and our emotions better. That was his thinking. Um, and so that brings us to kind of the more interesting aspect of it, which is that systems change slowly.
mm,
It's not that everyone suddenly eats healthy because there's nutritional value on food. It's that there are billions and billions of micro decisions happening all the time that slightly nudge us in that direction because of more awareness.
mm,
And those small nudges and the studies that kind of look at the evidence of the causality between the, nutritional value and decision making in food consumption show us that it's a very slow process. But when those slow nudges, when they reach a certain point where it becomes noticeable to the suppliers of food, then the suppliers change their habits and they start saying, okay, you know what, there's a significant enough move here that we need to start thinking about, lowering the calories in our food or offering healthy alternatives to what we currently offer. And this interplay in the system of supply and demand is really what changes things over time.
mm,
So there's no kind of silver bullet in saying, if I say to you, this building is definitely not good for you, but actually, you know what, your best friend lives there, so you're not gonna you're not gonna stop going to that building.
right.
Then you have to have a kind of more nuanced and like more realistic expectation of what these things can do. And the
Right.
realistic expectation, the way I see it, is that we need to think upstream, because there is nothing we can do right now that suddenly we're going to wake up, everything's going to be good.
Yeah.
Even if we had all of the tools, even if we had the lexicon to talk about it, because systems change slowly. And this kind of brings us back to the very first thing we talked about, which is the metrics, the choice, what represents our intent. And to me, that is the best upstream intervention we can have,
Mm,
because those metrics, those measures of success really drive the long-term evolution of place.
mm,
And I think that I would love to see healthier cities and, all of this happening. But the reality is we probably can't even imagine what a healthy place looks like, what a healthy lifestyle looks like, what a healthy culture looks like. we've got so many layers that we gather from the way we're educated, from the systems that we're in, that don't even allow us to, I think, imagine that way.